this time, Martin Odegaard.
Zinchenko from Ketia, it's in, it's 4. Martinelli tiptoeing in. Predatory, perfect. There is a gorgeous arrogance about Arsenal now.
It really is. They are enjoying every second of this.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to not another Arsenal podcast, the Carl Jenkinson of Arsenal podcast, and the Kai Havertz right hamstring of Arsenal podcast tonight. I'm not your charming host, Mike Hers. I'm the monotone drunk guy who usually is piping in from the background, but I'm going to do my best Hers impression today. He was feeling a little bit under the weather, much like basically every Arsenal forward who's not an old Chelsea guy or a child. But I digress, which we'll do plenty of this time. We're going to go around the horn. So we have, first and foremost, I'll introduce myself because it's all about me, gentlemen. I am Kelly, South Metro AFC. This episode is going to be fun. We're going to be going through some key questions, some big and interesting questions regarding state of Arsenal. And you'd think that this would be a week that we'd be apt to take off because we're in Dubai. We're sunning ourselves. We're getting ready for this key run-in and reinforcing our priors. And then we got some big bad news that we'll talk about a little bit more. But before I do that, I want to go and introduce my charming co-host. First of all, he may look like Pablo Mari. He might talk like a sophisticant, but he's still our friend. He'll try to entertain us here. West Suburban AFC, say hello.
What's going on, Kelly? Thanks for the kind compliment. I'm Pablo Mari, but 20 years older. That's okay. I'm good, man. I almost bailed last minute, to be honest with you. I'm drinking coffee because I had a late night last night working, but I'm here. I'm committed to the cause. I see we got some people in the live chat, which means I think we're gonna have some fun tonight. And since I was one that drafted the questions for the pod, I didn't want to miss out on the fun we're gonna have. So it should be a good one. I'm happy to see Jared's here too. So.
Ooh, yeah. I mean, Chris is jumping out in front, and we have a very special guest today. Occasional podcaster, great collector of Arsenal memorabilia, and back channel Twitter chat contributor, Jared, JC_AFC is with us tonight. How you doing, Jared?
Yeah, awesome to see you guys. It's been a long time since we've gotten to live pod together. We spend a lot of time, like you said, in the group chat talking Arsenal, but good to be back and an interesting time. Like you said, you'd think this would be kind of a downtime and extra interesting because typically when we podcast, there's, a lot of variation. And do you think the club got it right? Do you think the club got it wrong amongst all of us? And I feel like tonight it's just to what scale do you think the club got it wrong? I'm not sure anybody's going to be on the other end of that pendulum swing.
Well, you'd be surprised. We had some discussion beforehand, and I think this is one of those things where a lot of the goings on have been, like Jared said, there's a lot of things that go back and forth. There's tons of shades of gray in football fandom and what Arsenal do, because when you have this many possibilities and this many potential outcomes when you start the beginning of a match or a transfer season or formations, rotations, all that stuff, there's all of these shades of gray, and you're never going to be 100% sure that this could have gone this way or we did the wrong thing. And this is one of those rare times in football that everybody was pretty sure we're doing the wrong thing. Then we're really sure we're going to do the wrong thing. We did that wrong thing, and now the fallout of that wrong thing is going to be probably relatively ugly. And exacerbated, too, by some of the news, too, that Liverpool did, in fact, comically drop points to a really awful Everton team today, which I think is an appropriate piling on of all of our histrionics.
Fucking hilarious.
I mean, literally, I think when I saw that, I literally just laughed. Like, I was in an open house for work, and I literally saw, I was just like, oh my God, of course, naturally. But anyway, Hers warned me that I need to stop putting the ox before the carts or the cart before the ox and doing a bunch of weird stuff. So anyway, as Christian mentioned, we are doing big questions today. So because Jared is our very special guest on this platform, you're going to get the honors of going first. So here we go. Big question of the day. Most people probably know if you're intense enough to be listening to this podcast in the middle of the night, England time, and tuning in at 9:30 for normie Midwestern people time. Kai Havertz did, in fact, suffer a season-ending hamstring injury while sunning himself on the beach in Dubai. Do they have beaches in Dubai? Anybody? Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway, so Havertz out for the season adds to Jesus out for the season, which adds to Saka out with a hamstring tear, and on and on and on. And Martinelli out with a hamstring strain. With Kai Havertz suffering that muscle injury, we now have 3 total fit forwards at the club. And if you want to count these as entire people, I mean, good on you. But one of them is Raheem Sterling. The other one is Ethan Munieri, who is so young, he's not allowed to change with the rest of the team. And then Leandro Trossard, we would probably consider more of a utility forward who can spot start in different areas, as by far the longest CV and by far the most effective forward probably for the run in now. What do you do, Jared? Who do you repurpose? What would you do, and what would you expect Arteta to do to try to overcome the fact that we are comically short in that bit?
I mean, it's a tall task. And I think we should preface the whole segment by saying everything we're about to say is not anything we would advocate for in any normal circumstance. Every idea that comes forward now is going to be a, break open glass in case of emergency situation. And yeah, it's tough when you only have 3 and one of them Sterling, who I think, to be honest, I'll try and be fair to him. He could play 30 minutes at a decent level and maybe have a small impact on games. He's a 30-minute guy. Yeah. The problem is when you only have 3 guys, you need 90 out of everybody. So I think it's going to be interesting to see if we change the formation to where it would typically be like a 2 up front, maybe like a 3-5-2, play something like Lewis Skelly and Timber wingback sort of situation and really get creative with it. Yeah. But I think we're going to have to do some of that just based on the numbers. Mm-hmm. The one thing, if we're going to keep a similar formation, I could see not as much this year as last year. We saw games where Gabriel Jesus, who obviously isn't a great goal scorer, but has some other skills, would be coming back almost to the midline at times to help in the build up and move us forward into the final third where we try and control possession. All of those things he did well. I feel like we may end up having to shove Waneri into that spot and have him do that and almost play as an extra midfielder for control. And then once we get into the final third, just kind of flood the box with volume of players. Yeah. Even this season, we've seen Declan Rice at times far forward. We've seen Miko Marino far forward. So I think that's going to be our only option, because even if you go 2 up front and you call it Waneri and Trossard, then what do you do when one of them needs to come off? I mean, Sterling isn't fit to play in a front 2, obviously, for any real amount of time. But it's going to be really squirrely, and we don't really have any youth players that show any signs. I'm sure we'll have, the name escapes me. I know you guys know it. We were talking about him the other day. He'll probably get some bench time and maybe see the last 5-10 minutes of games. But
Butler, Deji, whatever his name is, that guy.
Okay.
Hyphenated last name, which is all we tend to attract at Arsenal.
Carlos Sego Jr., I think, came back from either League One or League Two. And so he's probably going to have to be on Premier League benches. Somebody who is, I think Sego Jr. is like 20 or 21, so he's a little bit older. Again, is basically a sub League One or League Two level player, but he is somebody who's made his debut for Arsenal and is somebody who would probably be trusted to just sit there or go in, because now we're in that spot too, Jared. We're like, we literally have concerns about just filling out a bench now because you can't just have, I mean, if we just went with first team players, we literally would not have any forwards on the bench.
We're going to have 3 goalkeepers and 4 left backs on the bench is what we're going to have.
Maybe Neto is a better striker than he is a goalkeeper. We can hold out hope for that. Chris, do you want to jump in on that one? Do you have any sense of what you would do or what Mikel would be apt to do?
I think James, for as much as I don't love his reporting during these kinds of times, James McNicholas, because I think in many cases, I think he is, and I think for good reason, he defends the club. I mean, he is a journalist. He has access. He probably needs to do that to keep his access as good as it is. But one thing he did say in a recent podcast, which I thought was interesting, was that he felt that Arteta was more loath to repurpose a guy like, I don't know, say like Timber. If you needed some guy to pitch in 15 minutes at wing, or to continue playing Tierney at left wing, which I know we've already seen. There's been lots of rumors of Mikel Marino perhaps playing a little bit of striker or central forward. I tend to agree with Jared that I think we may be more likely to mix up our formation to hopefully hide some of the vulnerabilities and lack of depth we have now in the forward positions, which means you're going to have players who have been playing on the wing, maybe playing more as midfielders, fullbacks maybe playing as wing backs. But I think eventually we're going to have to see some players playing somewhat massively out of position. I mean, could you see Calafiori maybe playing a little bit further forward, especially because we've got Miles Lewis-Skelly, who is, or whatever his name is. I always forget his name. Miles Lewis-Skelly playing really well at left back. So I think this is the benefit, I guess, if I'm putting my most rose-colored tinted glasses on of buying guys that are flexible, that can play multiple positions. I think we're really, though, testing the extremes of that philosophy in what we may have to do for the next 3-4 weeks. Having said that, Martinelli, I think, has been reported that his injury wasn't reported nearly as bad as they once feared, so he may be back sooner than we had hoped, sooner than we had all feared. So that's another piece that may give us a bit of cover in the meantime. And then, we only have 7 games in between now and April.
Yeah.
So can this iteration plus Martinelli survive 7 games over 3 months, 2 months? Maybe. So yeah, I think it's going to depend on which guys are in the red zone already. Do we suffer more injuries in attack? God forbid. And I think the more those things start to go against us, the more creative Arteta is going to have to be.
Well, from a probability perspective, there's not as many guys who can actually get hurt. So like only 3 more forwards can get hurt.
That's true.
So like that's good. That's something.
That really is rose tinted glasses.
Yeah. My personal opinion, I think the easiest pivot is going to be that Kieran Tierney is going to play a lot of left wing. We've seen that late in games in attacking. His skill set kind of mimics like a traditional left-sided winger, and kind of backpacking on what you guys said too. I think we're going to flood the box and just have a lot. It's going to be Pulis's Stoke, and that's going to be what it's going to have to be now.
Yes, no target man except for Marino, maybe, because
I think Gabriel is going to stay higher, especially for secondary recycled possessions and off of set pieces. I think Marino is going to play more for that reason. Again, I do agree. I think we could see Calafiori in as a midfielder, especially late in games, or having him be kind of a. Remember, like when we used to see the rogue Tomiyasu, where like Tomiyasu had liberty to just like attack the box. I think we're going to see a lot of that too, where it's like a chaos guy up in the box, especially in the last segments of games where we need goals or something like that. It's going to be pretty fucking ugly, and I think the club deserved to look at a really ugly product now, because I find this to be I found this to be infuriating in the summer, more so the beginning of January, apoplectic at the end of January. Now I just feel like I'm like smoking meth watching my club do things. On speaking of smoking meth, no, we're not talking about that.
Wait, hold on. There's no question in there about smoking.
I added one. Okay. So going back to Jared, I think it's pretty clear, and I don't think it's stepping way off base to say that this was like quite a failure of squad building in the last 2 windows. But what I'm seeing a ton online is who's at fault. So basically everybody's taking their hobby horses, and if they really back KSE or back management, they're blaming Arteta for all of it. This is a huge Arteta problem, all sorts of Arteta problems. Really big Arteta backers who he walks on water for them, they're saying KSE screwed Arteta. They put him in a no-win situation. Like, what do they expect? He's going to leave and go to a place that'll support him. How do you appropriate the blame for the current setup, the lack of options, the like kind of injuries that you could certainly probably attribute to overplaying, overuse during a key period? As for how do you feel for KSE's blame, Arteta's blame, and the medical staff? How would you appropriate, if you had 100 points, how would you appropriate the blame and why?
So, of course, it's all speculation. We don't know what happens behind the scenes to be privy to the conversations to give an exact answer. I don't place a ton on Arteta because he's the manager of the team. He's responsible for what happens on the pitch primarily, which what's on the pitch for what he's had available has been pretty good. We're still sat second in the league and in a good spot in Champions League, even with a team that's just riddled with injuries, from losing Saliba early in the year to Odegaard for months to Saka for months. with all of those things, if you'd told us up front where would we finish in those circumstances, I don't think many of us would have said second. We probably would have guessed a little bit lower with Liverpool playing as well as they are.
You could still be right with that, by the way.
Yeah. To me, I think if I had to say, I'm leaning towards it being more of a front office 8-0 potentially issue. And it's tough because we saw them place a bid for what was rumored to be 45 million for Ollie Watkins right at the end of the window. Obviously, if you're going to bid for him, we'd all agree it should have come earlier in the window. There was a ton of opportunities to handle that whole situation much better than it was. All that said, I place more on him or whoever he works with than I do Arteta or KSE because $45 million used correctly could have got us a player or two players to bolster the positions we needed. So I'm not saying that KSE is the greatest ownership of all time and they provided unlimited funds, obviously. Yeah. What I am saying is if we could bid 45 million for Watkins, that means that money was available in January. And had we allocated those funds a little bit more appropriately, you bring in one or two players, it still probably doesn't look the way we want it to look because we're not bringing in star players for that amount. Yeah. But once Havertz goes down, you can at least field a team and have a squad player as a substitute, which is something we can't say right now.
Yeah.
So for me, the overwhelming amount goes to the front office. I would put a little bit on KSE, not really any at all on Arteta, and I'd put like 80% on the front office group because that's your only job. Is to make sure, literally that's what you're there for, is to put a squad out there that can compete for what we want to compete for. And I think coming into the season, we had a squad good enough to do that. If we don't get riddled with injuries at every level, this team is definitely good enough top to bottom when healthy to win the Premier League and or Champions League. I said at the beginning of the season, I think we have the best squad in the league when healthy. I think we're better than Liverpool, better than City, anyone else you'd want to name. But when you remove half of those players from the lineup, it gets dicey real quick. And it's the responsibility of that front office team to make sure, you've got to be a little bit risk averse, even if you don't want to outlay those funds. And I know we don't want to buy a player that interrupts any future plans or invest money in a player for years that we don't want beyond this summer.
I got words on that also.
Yeah, I can't find a reason that, just for example, because the name's been floated out a bunch, that you don't take Murata for 5 months, no option, no obligation, just to fill a spot. Something like that, I think, is the logical middle ground that there's no real strong argument against, other than potentially saving a very small amount of money in the grand scheme that are his wages. Yeah. But once Jesus goes down, I think it went from something that probably should have happened to something that absolutely had to happen. So it was that's the big failure for me. And I think it's hard to justify that move, to not make a move at all.
And we're 2 players past that now. That's the funniest thing is when Jesus went down and it was clear that he was stretchered off and it was going to be an ACL. I totally agree. That is the time where you go, okay, overdrive, we're pulling things forward, or we're bracketing. If you can't get Sesko to come, we're very infatuated with Sesko, it appears, and we're seeing him as the crown prince for reasons I can't quite fathom, as much as I like his talent. There needs to be, it seems sensible to me that you're going to have tiers of operation, right? You're going to have your apex tier, which is I have a player that I love. If he's available and we can make it happen, we're willing to overpay to pull it forward because it works for this year and it creates more continuity going into next year, blah, blah, blah. So that's tier 1. You get your target, you pull him in. Tier 2 is maybe like the Ollie Watkins tier. Somebody that you admire, is not the perfect fit, but circumstances dictate that it's going to be worth it. The long-term lack of a transfer fee, because Arsenal don't sell anybody for any transfer fee, so who fucking cares, I would say. But realistically, you get a guy that's at the top level for a couple more seasons and somebody who's likely going to be a very useful player for you for probably the entirety of his 5-year contract. There you go. That's tier 2. And tier 3 is literally the hitting of our doing dry loans for Alvaro Morata and Matthijs Tel, which probably in total their wages and loan fees would probably have been less than 10 mil, at or less than 10 million total for 6 months of work. I was getting hand waved, and I'm going to pull up my prior year. I was getting hand waved like that was the stupidest thing ever. And it's nobody can react to me now. It's how much better is Murata and Matthijs Tel than empty lockers right now? Having somebody, experienced professional center forward who's familiar with the league, who can come in and just soak minutes. Or somebody who can play across the front line and just soak minutes and run. Those are things that are important. And I think Chris and I have talked about this a lot in our back channels too, that I think we have too many non-football lawyers who are treating this like a bean count and a spreadsheet and are maybe not. It's not as intuitive that we are really light on people. This is going to cause problems, and then they go to the data, and then they go to the future plans, and like people need to understand all of those financial things now. It appears like they're all self-imposed by KSE. It's not a salary cap. It's not like professional NBA basketball where you have, if you sign your players, there's tiers of punitive salary taxes where like, so some background, anybody who's in England, basically there's a salary cap in the NBA. And when you get a certain amount over the salary cap, it's called the first apron. And so then you have to pay the league a fine for spending too much over the salary cap. And then there's a massive punitive fine that happens when you go into the second tax apron. So you're re-signing your own players is so expensive and your payroll is so far above what the league wants it to be to maintain competitive balance that you are going to be astronomically fined, which again, if you're up to date on your stuff, that's the reason that Luka Doncic, who's one of the best players in the world, was traded away from Dallas to LA because they were terrified of the second apron. I'm from Minnesota, so nobody gives a shit about the Timberwolves, but we traded our second best player and one of the best players in the history of the Timberwolves and Karl Towns to New York because with Anthony Edwards, who's a more important player, signing his supermax contract to put the Wolves into the second apron, it would have cost ownership so much money that they basically shagged off one of our best players ever for like a good player and then a kind of a shitty player. And it was all money related, right? So I don't know. It's not the same type of punitive level. And I guess I don't understand the risk management calculus. Chris, do you want to jump in on this at all?
Yeah, I think the flaw in logic is what Gunnerwork says in the chat. And that is, if Ollie Watkins is a target for us, if we see him as someone that we can get 3+ years of excellent value out of, and I don't mean financial value, I mean value on the pitch.
Yep.
Why do you so severely underbid for the player? It's clear. I mean, I think everybody would agree Ollie Watkins is worth more than $40 million. And so if you're in a desperate situation, which we all were when we hit January 12th or whatever it was when Gabriel Jesus went down, and if that's a guy that you're willing to commit to, why are we messing about with a $40 million bid? It doesn't. £40 million bid. It doesn't make any sense to me. The logic doesn't hold water to me that we wouldn't just go in there with paid, I don't know, 15% over, 20% over what he might normally go for and get your guy and protect your floor, maybe even give yourself an outside chance of still getting silverware this year. It seems logical to me. I think though you're right, Kelly, in that, and Magic Hat's done a really good job, I think, of elevating this conversation online. Yep. In that he's been very early on saying the club suffers from a lack of a CEO, a businessman, a guy who can set a strategy, who knows how to take calculated risk to get maximum ROI and benefit from investments that you put into the club, in the hopes that you get far more of a return on the back end. I again don't mean just financial. I also mean trophies and accolades and increase in status and all the sort of soft and tangible things that matter to fans. And I think to some degree matter to KSE because this is an asset that they're holding in the long term. And the more prestigious, the more status, the more rewards, the more trophies we win, in theory, the value of the asset goes up. And that's, I think, what they ultimately care about. So there's a lot of, I think there's enough gaps and holes in from our perspective as fans, and not knowing exactly the conversations that were had, not knowing exactly who's reporting the BS and who's reporting the facts, and just, I think, a lack of just understanding because we don't work at the club of how all this stuff works, that I think we're all giving our best guess and our best educated guess on what's happening. From my perspective, I think an underappreciated perhaps aspect of this from the injury side of things is I wonder what the conversations are between the medical team and Arteta, and how decisions are made when a player is sort of on the edge, if you will. And if a player is on the edge, does the medical team have authority to tell Arteta, hey, if you play this guy, he's an well above average risk of going out for a long-term injury if you play him, so you can't? Or is the final authority with Arteta? And I don't know the answer to that question, but I think if it's the former, where the authority lies with the medical team, I think there's definitely some blame to go around there, because I think we've just experienced a lot of injuries this year. I mean, us and Spurs have suffered the most, I think, from an injury perspective in the Premier League.
Chris, what do you make of?
Yeah.
What do you make of the graph that's been going around? I think it's Scott, ABP Scott.
Yeah.
I think that did a calculation of it's some amalgamation of the average distance covered per match.
Yep.
And you can kind of appropriate, like, there's the X and the Y axis, and like Spurs is like spectacularly the outlier of like pace of play, and like I think isn't it like pace of play in meters or something like?
It's intensity out of possession and in possession, I think, and I think I think they measure that by like number of sprints and distance covered, and some combination of the two.
Yeah.
What do I make of that? Well,
what do you make of the fact that Spurs? If I'm looking at that graph as just some idiot, I'm saying that Spurs do a ton of sprinting in and out of possession. They're probably going to get hurt a lot because they are sprinting and tearing around the pitch constantly. But like Arsenal, when you look back, we're almost dead, like almost the most
right in the middle.
We're almost like hitting a bullseye. So if we are running an average amount in possession, out of possession, like where the hell are these injuries coming from? Like, why is it bad luck? Is it, again, like you said, is it a medical team thing? Is it comeuppance for a lot of these players playing lots of minutes last season? Because I know that was a graph that went around too, that our key players played an astronomical amount of percentage of minutes relative to some other similar ones. But like this year too, some of these players are getting hurt are not in the top cohort of people playing minutes, at least in the league. Is it just, tell me what you think about that whole thing?
Well, I think it's a pretty simple story for Spurs. I think they play one way no matter what, no matter who's playing. And I think repeat sprints over and over and over again, in the way that they play suicidal football, both going forward and running back towards their own goal, creates a lot of muscular injuries. And I think that if you look at the nature of their injuries this year, it's by far, in a way, muscular injuries that's been plaguing their squad. And as long as Ange isn't going to have a plan B in terms of how to play and play a bit more with control and, slow down the pace and, try to exhibit some modicum of decency towards his players, I think they're going to continue to have those sorts of issues. When it comes to Arsenal, I think you've got to look at it beyond just this season. I think this season does tell a story, but we've been saying for a long time now how the way in which Saka plays, the way he gets kicked, the way he has to run back and defend out of possession, the way that we ask Kai Havertz to play his position, not just this year, but last year, and some of the other guys. I mean, I'm worried about Declan Rice for the same reasons, in that he runs his butt off everywhere all over the pitch for 90 minutes, week after week, game after game. When does he reach that level where his hamstring goes? Knock on wood. I hope it doesn't happen, but he's a guy that I have my eye on because, if you were asking me to place a bet on who it happens to next, he's probably the next guy I think about, just for the very way in which he's asked to play. But I think it's a culmination. I think it's a combination of what's happened over the course of multiple years with a lot of these guys, is that they've been asked to play in a way that adds a lot of mileage on their legs, but also, especially when we think about the team from an out of possession perspective, we've been called the best out of possession team in the world. Why? Because when we turn the ball over, we get into shape really quickly. What does that mean? Every player on the pitch goes from an attacking mindset to a defensive mindset, and they're sprinting into positions so that the other team can't hit us on a counter, right, and get a cheap goal against us, which again sometimes happens. But I think it's I think it's some of that. But when I go back to that graph you were talking about, Kelly, it is interesting to look at that and see that we're kind of no worse or no better in terms of that intensity and distance covered. We're sort of average in the league, which tells me that I think it is just a combination of years upon years of playing in this way that and with lack of rotation, which has been a criticism that's been levied at Arteta in years past, that I think has just caught up to us. Last thing I'll say, and then I'll let you guys jump in here. I saw an interesting stat for this year that I think maybe illuminates why Liverpool has been lucky on the injury front, and that is that when you look at just distance covered by teams, Liverpool is dead last. They are 20th in the league for distance covered. So they exhibit a lot of control. They score quite a bit of goals. They snuff out quite a bit of chances on the defensive side. Maybe not chances, but they certainly snuff out a lot of goals. And perhaps it's for that reason, and maybe that reason alone, or at least primarily that reason, that they haven't suffered those muscular injuries nearly as much as us, City, Tottenham, etc.
And I would say that maybe other than Chelsea, who has a lot of like 5 and 6 out of 10s, like they do have an extraordinary amount of like high quality depth too. Like the collective attacking group that they're able to put out is shades above what we're able to do. And I'd even argue too that for Arsenal, like Aston Villa has a really superior attacking group. Like if you actually go through that group collectively, even when healthy, is not probably not in the top 4 of the league. So I think that there's a quality issue and obviously an overplaying issue there. Jared, here, since you're the guest, I'll make you handle like the doomsday potato here. With these injuries now, do we truly need to worry about the floor now? Are we in a position now, looking at the table, where you were legitimately concerned that we could fall out of the top 4? One, and again, it's not guaranteed, I think, with the coefficient that the Premier League will get the 5th place. So, like, is it possible for us to fall out of the top 4 if things really go tits up here, or maybe even fall out of the top 5?
Well, I mean, even prior to the Havertz injury, the chances of it are never zero, right?
Yeah.
And now with him going down, they're obviously still not zero, and they're larger than what they were. I feel pretty good that we're going to maintain a Champions League position, only because it sounds like Ben White's coming back healthy. Our back line is healthy. Our midfield is relatively healthy, and they're all very, very good. We've got a back 4 and a midfield that are Champions League champion level, Premier League champion level players. So I feel good that we're not going to concede a lot of goals. So that's going to keep us in contention in a lot of games. We're going to have a lot of 0-0 games, 1-1 games, and we're going to have to be looking for late winners, which is tough when you've got no attackers. But our team is still solid enough that I feel comfortable saying that we'll probably maintain a Champions League place. And I think the evidence of that is, for the criticism he gets, Arteta is adaptable in his own way in that he finds ways to get results. When you look at Spurs coming into the season, they were a team looked at that said, hey, they may try and fight for a European place, right? Somewhere in 4 to 6 range. They've got killed with injuries, and they're just a sniff above relegation. We've been killed with injuries. We're sat second. So we've shown that with limited resources, we can maximize results to some degree. Now, there's always a point where, talent is what it is. And when you've got none of it out there, you fall way off. But I feel good enough about our midfield and defense that we're going to be able to maintain those spots, especially with, having a week off between games coming up now. All those guys should maintain, a good amount of rest. And then if Martinelli comes back, not somebody who we would say is going to be the difference maker in our season, certainly, but it feels that way now when your other option is Sterling every single game. So that return feels a lot more important than it would have otherwise. But yeah, the overall quality of the team's still there. We have good shape. We're good out of possession. We're still going to dominate the game, dominate control of the ball. So I feel good that even if we waver a little bit, we're still going to maintain a Champions League spot, which is absolutely paramount for probably all of our summer plans.
Yeah, and I would agree with it. So some frame of reference here, we're now, with Liverpool playing Everton today, we're all caught up in the league on 24. We're 7 points off of Liverpool, which isn't great, but we are also, you have to go down to Newcastle United with 41. We're 9 points clear of Newcastle, which would hypothetically be the 6th place team. So there's a cohort of City, Newcastle, and Bournemouth that are all on 41 or 40 points. And so we'd have to probably drop below that group. And I agree with you that even in our current iteration, like we will stink the shit out of games to prevent that from happening and we are capable of doing a lot of 1-1 draws with good teams and like winning 1-0 and 2-1. And I think that we are going to be unpleasant to watch, but that is going to be probably a reliable deliver of enough points. I don't think we're going to push Liverpool anymore. And we might even get pipped by Chelsea or Forest or if City go on a run or something. But I think the odds that we will, between here and the end of the season, be 9 points worse than those teams, I agree is unlikely. And actually seeing the table helped me do that. Here's another kind of an add-on to Chris, if you want to do this instead of answering the same question. My biggest concern, this is me ad-libbing here, so I apologize that I'm catching you off guard. My biggest concern is that the only real KPI for KSE is the top 4. My concern is that they view this, and I went into this online, I think, with Denver Gooner, who's quite a good follow on Twitter too. Somebody who's kind of a good guy who straddles apathy and rage pretty well and fun and healthy. But My concern is that KSE spend a ton of money, but the money that they spent was going to go from shit team to upper mid-table team, and from upper mid-table team to Champions League, reliable Champions League team. And in the 3 windows since we have established ourselves as like we push for the title, we are firmly here in the top 4. We've seen 3 pretty disappointing windows now. So January, summer, January. So 2 inactive Januaries, and then a summer that we very clearly missed the mark. Is my concern legitimate that KSE's only true KPI is making top 4, and when that's established, they don't really give a shit past that? It's like, do the best you can with what you got? Or is that just recency bias and my cynicism and affinity for rum taking over and the trenches? Like, tell me I'm crazy, tell me I'm right. What do you think about that?
Well, you and I had talked about this, and I think in general we agree on this point. I think it'll be quite telling what happens this summer. I know we feel like we say this every summer. It's gonna be quite telling what KSE is really all about this summer. Like, I feel like we have that conversation every winter. But last summer, I feel like there's enough weird stuff that happened. Like, Liverpool bought nobody basically.
Yeah.
They bought Chiesa for 15 million, and that was it.
Who was terrible and is terrible.
He's played less than 90 minutes this whole season, I think, because he's been injured. He's like the Tomiyasu of wingers. And then City bought somebody from themselves in Savinho and nothing else. And they sold Alvarez, so they actually made money, which is unusual for that club. The only team that really bought was Chelsea.
Yeah,
but that's not like unusual. In terms of our cohort of teams that tend to spend at the top of the table.
Yeah, but looking to it, I mean, Forest did a lot of stuff, but they were not in our cohort until this year, and I view them as probably a dilettante in the top 4 who will fall off when they have actual real competition. And like Nuno is who he is. I think they are going through a sparkling run of form that they will not be able to consistently go through. Like, did Newcastle do an extraordinary amount of business? Like
they had to sell more than they wanted to.
Yeah. Like, I guess Fulham did some stuff, and Villa's like quite a ways behind all the big boys too, even though they spent. So like, you are right about the summer.
I mean, I think all the talk was that there's new rules coming down in terms of percentage of your income being spent on, I think, wages, but
it's percentage of your turnover, I think, right?
Something like that. I'm not an expert here, but I know that's been a lot of talk around there being stringent rules, as well as in Europe, to qualify and be able to make sure you're above board for UEFA. There is more stringent financial rules. So I think there's enough of that kind of news going around to suggest that clubs like ours, Liverpool, City, etc., could be positioning themselves. We certainly can say that about City and potentially Liverpool, perhaps Arsenal too, for future spending. But this January window certainly doesn't give us a lot of confidence, a lot of encouragement that while we're now back in the Champions League, we are looking to do that little bit more to get us over the top. Especially when the narrative for the first 12 years of their ownership, granted it was split with another owner, they weren't full owners, but what was, when we were in the Champions League the whole time, it didn't seem like there was any motivation to spend more than they had to. I think there is the scars and baggage of the first decade of their ownership here that I think is coloring our perspective on whether or not they will do what it takes. And I think this summer, I don't think there's any excuse now. I think if they don't go for it this summer, I think we'll all be justified in thinking that this is a top 4 project, and that's all they really care about, because that's where the money comes in. And we're back to a fully self-sustaining model again. So
you want to jump in, Jared?
Yeah, I'll offer a kind of a counterpoint on KSE.
Perfect.
And this is just projection of a way I think they could think at it as, even if we're saying they're not as concerned with sport, they're there for the business side and the money making side. And we saw early on, I think it was, back in maybe 2014, 10 plus years ago, that Stan Kroenke was quoted as saying, "I didn't buy Arsenal to win trophies." And I think that quote really sticks in people's minds, and understandably so. That's not what you want to hear from the owner of the team you follow. But in that time, when you look at every other pro sports franchise they own, I think they've won the championship in every respective league for every team they own, other than Arsenal thus far. And I
did the cross team win? Come on, Jared.
But I referenced in our group chat one day, the Denver Nuggets, when they won the NBA championship, the prior year they were valued at 1.9 billion, won the championship and jumped to 3.5 billion.
Yeah.
So I think if for no other reason than that, all of their teams happening to have won and seeing their overall value, go up by 60, 80, 100% may give them the motivation to look at it, not as even from the sporting side, as much as the investment side, that if you spend $100+ million this summer, bring in 2 or 3 key players, whatever they are, and that gets you over the hump to where you win the league, the revenue that comes downstream from that is going to far offset, that initial upfront cost of the summer. I still don't think we're going to be a Chelsea where we spend 150, 200 million every single year. But when the time is right, I think you see a Declan Rice for 100 million. I think this coming summer is one where we all expect it, because we haven't spent a lot this past summer. We didn't spend anything in January.
Yeah.
So however much money's in the coffers to start are essentially still sitting there waiting to be used. And especially for a team like us that's very competitive at every position on the field, sans one, it just makes no sense to not invest heavily in that one position when that's the obvious thing that could get you over the top.
Yep. All right. So here's a question kind of regarding. So there's a bunch of Saliba noise, right? So the rumblings that we are hearing, and again, God only knows, because for as many as Arsenal like phony ITK accounts, there's about 10 Madrid ones. But the big smoke going on is that Madrid is going to go very, very hard, and William Saliba is their number one priority. I believe Saliba, after the season, has 2 more years left on his contract. And through all the media briefings, which we do get an awful lot of contract media briefings, most recently today for Gabriel Martinelli, of all people, like that's going to quash our concerns. But I don't recall any sort of club briefings with friendly journalists about Saliba being close on a new contract. He has 2 years after this, so it's the time to maximize his value. Jared, this is a twofold question. One, do you think how the club have behaved and how we finished the season could potentially impact his willingness to stay or push to go to Madrid? And if he's in that spot where you're not sure he's going to re-sign the contract, what number would it take to allow Saliba to go to Madrid? Where are you at for those 2 points?
So I'll say there hasn't been a lot of talk about him or his contract renewal, but I haven't heard any negative things. No noise coming from him, his agent. There's not been any talk other from Madrid people saying Madrid want him, which of course they do. He's incredible. He's the best player at his position at that age.
We literally probably have 3 or 4 center backs that would vastly improve Real Madrid. We have Ben White and Urin Timber, and Big Gabby would also be their best center back. So
absolutely, yeah. I mean, compared to their back line, we have an embarrassment of riches in ours. So of course they want him. He's phenomenal. There's, he's one of those guys that he's a victim of his own success, and that he can only play for about 4 teams in the world because no one else could afford him already at age, what is he, still 23, I believe. So he's still a few years off of his prime. And the reality is we'd love to keep all these guys, keep the unit together, see them grow. That's not the way football works. Good players move every summer, and it's a business. There's always a number. Now you could say a player's unsellable, but that's not really true. Bukayo Saka is not unsellable. If someone came in with some absurd amount, you have to take it. That's just the nature of the beast. Yeah. So for me, if Real Madrid this summer said, we want Saliba this summer, the price I would state as Arsenal is my opening position is 175 million, because I want it to seem nearly unattainable. They've spent crazy amounts of money. When you've got the talent they have, they bring in revenue like nobody else. So it's not unattainable for them at that figure, but I also don't want him to leave. So if they come back and counter at 150, I think if you're a team like Arsenal and somebody offers you 150 million for a player, you have to take it. That would be the number for me where you have to sell him. Now, that said, I'm not concerned with him leaving. By all accounts, he's been happy at Arsenal. And I think we'd be able to work out, what's known now as kind of the standard gentleman's agreement, re-sign with us if next summer things don't go well here and you want to move on, we've got a number in mind. We'll get you the move you want.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that also buys us time that we improve the squad this summer, we go out and achieve something next year. Then he doesn't, that desire to leave may lessen to some degree, or we can convince him to stay for a couple more. So for as good as he is, my level of nervousness around Saliba right now is actually quite low. I feel pretty comfortable with us and him right now.
I'll add the counterpoint to that.
Yeah.
He's got 2 years left this summer.
Mm-hmm.
We know Real Madrid's MO is to try and get guys under market value.
Yep.
And to work behind the scenes knowing that they are a destination club for almost anyone who plays in Europe that's worth anything. They're doing it to Trent Alexander-Arnold right now, right? He is I don't know, $100 million asset. I don't know. I'm making it up. He's
for sure. And with a contract and a fair market, 100 plus million, I think is fair for Alexander.
So they're basically going to get him for free because Liverpool can't sign. He refuses to sign a new contract with Liverpool, despite the fact that this is his boyhood club.
Yep.
And they're going to get him on a free. And what they're probably promising him is, hey, we didn't pay a fee for you. We're going to put you on massive wages.
Yep.
More than anybody else can pay you.
Yep.
And that's a huge, hugely attractive to a young player who has he's won basically every trophy there is to win at Liverpool.
Mm-hmm.
My worry is that if you cannot convince Saliba for whatever reason, whether it's we're not showing the ambition, we haven't won trophies, we can't pay him what he wants, whatever it is this summer, that we get into a situation where he does that exact same thing to us, assuming that this news coming out of media saying that Madrid want him is true. Now, someone noted on Twitter, I don't know if this is true, that all the noise about Real Madrid wanting him is coming out of French outlets, which suggests that this is actually his agent putting this kind of news into the media because he is trying to position his own client for the best possible contract to stay at Arsenal. Honestly, I never know what to do with this kind of information because I don't know what's real and what's not.
Yep.
If that's indeed happening, you can't blame the agent for doing that. I would hope, though, that if, say, by August 1st of this summer, that we would have re-upped Saliba to something in the high 200s, up to 300,000 a week, because I think that's what it's going to take to keep him here and to extend his contract another couple years. If he doesn't, and Real Madrid's willing to, I don't think they're going to, but they're willing to give you 120 million as an example, I think you have to strongly consider it, because I don't think as a club, like how Arsenal operate, or how we think Arsenal have operated, at least in the past, that you can allow a player as important as he is to run his contract down and leave for free in 2 years. No. I just don't think you can.
And I think that I would go so far as to say that we were so burned by that our upper management would be inclined to take maybe less money than we think he's worth rather than lose him for free. So if we're in a situation where Madrid is basically doing the poker thing and saying, or let's say PSG is another, a super club with massive resources that can basically do the exact same thing. You go, okay, you're going to take our 100 million now, or we're just going to tap him up because you have no means to do anything about it. And we're going to wait and try to battle him on a free. And we're going to pay his brother and his dad and his grandma tens of millions in fees because it's going to be way cheaper to do that and put him on $600K a week than it is going to be to pay you a transfer fee that's amortized over 5 years or whatever. I think that Arsenal in a position where they would rather take 75% of his market value rather than to have him just play out his contract, especially at that amount, because I don't think we're going to make that same mistake again. And I would say too, kind of, Jared talked about embarrassment of riches, losing Saliba sucks because I think he's one of the top 5 center backs in the world, but you still have Gabriel and you still have Ben White and you still have Ricardo Calafiori and you still have what you could probably argue is especially if you're stripping positions away from defenders and having versatile defenders, we probably have, besides Saliba, 3 of the other best 20 defenders in the world on the same team.
Yeah.
So I think I would agree with you guys if he's not re-upping and there's any sort of sniff of him doing the old Madrid stink out and turning it into a 2-year saga that's going to end up me leaving for free, I think the club would push him to leave. And it's unpleasant, but I mean, I think we'd be happy with that. Stan having 100 million more to like put in his DuckTales style Scrooge McDuck water tower that's just full of loose cash.
A couple other things I think we have going for us, though, is that it feels to me like Saliba and Gabriel are really close.
Yep.
And there's been talk that Gabriel is going to be re-upping his contract, and that is a good reflection on the fact that he feels comfortable committing his future to Arsenal.
Especially somebody who had Saudi buzz, not
correct.
Long ago.
Correct. That's a really good, important point. And then I think too, Saliba just doesn't give me vibes that he's not happy at Arsenal. I mean, he whenever we score, he is one of the. I mean, you guys have seen videos when we score. He's the one that acts the biggest fool, and I love him for it. Again, that doesn't mean that he's not going to leave, but I just get the sense that he feels comfortable here, that he feels like this is a place he can commit his medium-term future to. Again, not saying that money can't turn his head, can't say that if Real Madrid show real interest and real intent to get him that he won't leave. But all those kind of initial markers of what you see when a player is destined to move at some point in the short term, just don't seem to be present with him.
Well, and he's also not like this fountain of like charisma either. Like, so he's not somebody who's like Jude Bellingham was always destined to go to Real Madrid. Like that's there's no stage that can accommodate Jude Bellingham's showmanship and I mean ego and like thirst for the moment. Like that's something that's very like Real Madrid and like places like Real Madrid and Barcelona specifically provide a very specific stage for a specific type of player with a specific type of self-image. And Saliba seems like kind of an introverted dork. He doesn't talk a lot. He's somebody, again, who he's celebrating. He kind of reminds me of, back to U.S. sports, like Joe Mauer, who's a Hall of Fame catcher who played for the Minnesota Twins, who is a huge nerd and is really uncomfortable on camera. And the only reason that he's in the Hall of Fame is because he was an incredibly talented baseball player. Not because he had any thirst for the spotlight or anything. He does it because he is great at it, not because this is my moment and I'm going to step into center stage like the king of the world. Like that's not his personality. So I think twofold things might be helpful for Arsenal in re-upping him. One, he's obviously comfortable here. And he's comfortable in our system. And I think he's very well loved and is aware that he's very well loved by the fans. And I mean, he was somebody too that went back on loan to like subpar French league teams because he was comfortable there. And it took him a long time to bed in. And does he want to go to Madrid in that cauldron of pressure in a 100,000 seat multi-billion-dollar stadium where every single one of your missteps and back passes and headers are covered by multiple tabloid rags? Is that something that he wants to do? Or does he want to be in a club that loves him, appreciates him, in a system that highlights the strengths of good defenders, in a club in an area that's very friendly to French-speaking people and French players?
Yeah,
I think that there's a reasonable argument to be made that, and maybe at this point when he's 23 years old, he's saying, I don't want any of that shit right now. I'm good here, thanks. And again, he'll have plenty of time in the future. That's the nice thing about being a center back, is that you typically don't peak. I mean, Virgil van Dijk is probably still the best center back in the world. He's I think 30 or 31 now, maybe even older than that. So, I think
33. Yeah,
33, and he's still at the peak. I would argue at the peak of his powers, probably even more so than when he was kind of getting into those top 2 or 3 Ballon d'Or conversations. He's even better now, especially because you can just punch people and nothing happens to him, which has been helpful for him.
He just punched the ball away.
Oh my God. On this point here too, I want to shoehorn this in here because I think that we're going to be kind of surprising an agreement. Gabriel Magalhaes is our best defender this season, and right now.
We just going agree or disagree?
Just top it, agree or disagree.
Agree, and not just this year, has been.
Yep.
Wow. I actually think that latter part of what you just said, Jared's big. Is a big take. Say more.
I mean, I think last year, if no one asked me, but if they said, who's your Arsenal player of the year last season, I wouldn't even have been a thought. I would have taken him.
Yep.
I mean, he's tremendous. He keeps everybody organized at the back of what was the best defense in the league last year.
Mhm.
Also contributes goals on the front end, is a constant threat on set pieces, which have been and certainly now will continue to be one of our most dangerous opportunities to score. I think he's one of the most pivotal players in the team, and outside of the captain, first name on the team sheet.
For me, I wouldn't have agreed last year to this question, only because I feel like his fatal flaw was passing on the ball. I don't think I think when he came to Arsenal, and he's gotten progressively better every season, but he was not a good passer of the ball.
No, it's terrible.
Not at all. And I think if you're going to play in an Arteta system and do well in it and shine in it, you've got to be good in the ball. And I think he is massively improved in that area. But I think his biggest jump in improvement has been this year. I don't have the data to back it up. I'd love to go look it up and see if my eyes match the data. But I think that's the area where I think he had the biggest weakness. And I think that's where he's made the biggest improvement. And I think that's why, in addition to everything you just said, Jared, I think he is our best center back. I think Saliba's key weakness is something that he hasn't improved on yet. And that is, I think when teams go direct on us and they put a forward on him and they kick it long from a diagonal position, especially, I think he struggles. In that situation to defend that long ball over the top. Not because he's not fast. I think he doesn't judge the ball well in the air. And I think sometimes it feels a little bit like he's a little too relaxed when he's one-on-one in those situations.
He is relaxed at all times.
Yeah, which is great for a central defender. But I think in those situations, I don't think it does him any. I mean, he's got that Virgil van Dijk quality, right? Where Virgil van Dijk never looks pressed. He never looks like he's uncomfortable. Saliba's got that same kind of quality, but not necessarily the same outcome in that particular situation that a Van Dijk has. I think if he is going to become the complete no weakness central defender, I think that's the place where he needs to improve.
But I think he can do it because at 23, he's light years ahead of where Van Dijk was at 23.
Absolutely.
And we're big Gabby
for him.
Also,
wasn't Van Dijk at Celtic still at 23, or maybe he was at Southampton by then? But in any case, he was miles away from where
he was not at a team competing for Premier League. That's certainly
absolutely true.
No, and I think I would even say with some of our perceptions of how players are depend on like how smoothly and how athletically and how gracefully they move about the pitch, right? Gabriel still does stuff that is not easy on the eye. He looks like he's one of those people who moves. He looks like his shoes are like 2 sizes too big sometimes, right? Like he has a kind of like heel first run about him and kind of a hunch and kind of a like, this is actually relatively common for a lot of central defenders, but almost have like a violent movement about them. He is not really smooth. And I think it's exacerbated by the fact that like, look at Calafiori move, like has like a movement that you can dream on. Like it looks like a cross between a superhero and a runway model gliding about the pitch. And that's directly to his left. And like Timber has that, Timber and Lewis Skelly have the kind of compact, like athletic pop within like smoothness on the ball and rolling the ball across the studs and everything. And again, Gabriel is as cool as Saliba is cool as a cucumber. Even like Ben White is out there too and is very, very composed and is kind of has that quick dash, that smooth tackle and that smooth dribble in. And because Gabriel is like so functional in his movements, I think we underappreciate how good he is at dribbling out, taking angles, like again, that kind of blue collar work ethic and movement about him that makes you underappreciate how good and how fast and how competent and capable he is with the ball at his feet, just because of how he looks when he does it. And hopefully that minimizes how many people want him, because I cannot believe that is not a player that some of these super clubs are not throwing everything at, because if Saliba's a 150 million player, Gabriel's a 100 million pound center. Like, so it's basically Van Dijk and Guardiola, I think, was 90 million is the next most expensive. And even with Guardiola's forays into being this kind of bizarre, like left 8 goal scorer, he's not a particularly good defender. And he's nowhere near as valuable for City as this year, certainly as Gabriel is to us.
Yeah, it's interesting. Gabriel and Saliba are almost opposites in so many ways. And it's interesting that they work so well in tandem. Gabriel's very outspoken. He's the vocal leader of the back line. Saliba, as you said, very, very diminutive. He's not there for the theater. He's there to play the game and be successful. And also, the thing you said that stood out to me, Gabriel has a very blue-collar work ethic. You see he's improved year on year on year at Arsenal. Saliba's the opposite end, where he's always been looked at as,
Rolls Royce. Yeah.
The Rolls Royce. Yeah. He's the class player. You watch him and you say that's class football when you watch Martin Odegaard move. And it's interesting that they are complete opposites in so many ways. And it almost makes them the perfect pairing. Mm-hmm. And we talked earlier about, re-signing Saliba. I think having a solid partner next to you is a big benefit for a center half. His life is made infinitely easier out there because he has Gabriel partnering him. And I think to some degree that factors in. Mm-hmm. Now, does that mean he'll never move to Real Madrid? Probably not. The pull of winning Champions League every season, making 500,000 a week and all the rest of it. I mean, it's hard for anybody to turn down, but I do think in the short term, there are smaller factors that'll play into keeping him here, at least for a couple of more years, hopefully.
Yep. Okay. So we're going to do a little bit of fun time here. We got to an hour and I haven't ruined everything. So hopefully hers is not sleeping somewhere. I'm usually the person who drinks too much and takes us way off the reservation for when we're doing things. So hopefully he can, if he's not listening right now, hopefully he can listen back tomorrow and be proud of his baby boy for not destroying this podcast with my nonsense. Okay. So we're going to do a little bit of fun time as us being the director of the sporting director. We are Olabe. We are Jason Ato, assuming that that's a real person, not just a trench coat on a mannequin sitting around Arsenal headquarters. So the first one, Chris, you get to do this terrible task.
Good
if
Lord.
You had to go and sign a free agent or otherwise engineer a move for some scumbag forward that's sitting on a bench somewhere and takes the buyout, what is a reasonable or worthwhile deal to do to bring in a person who can potentially soak up actual real life minutes in meaningful competitions for Arsenal as a forward?
I came up with this question hoping that I would never have to answer it.
No, you reap what you sow.
Damn it. Well, I pulled up a Transfermarkt just because you could imagine.
It makes for unpleasant viewing, ladies.
It does. I mean, I'll read it to you. I meant to put it up on the platform so everybody could see it. I'll read it to you.
Yeah.
These are the players, and it's not pleasant viewing. It's as you would imagine after a January transfer window, like the leftovers, the stuff in the back of the refrigerator that starts to go moldy that you don't want to eat.
Yeah.
After a holiday dinner, that's 2 weeks after the fact. So, the highest market value of center forwards available in free agency is Wissam Ben Yedder at 4 million euros.
Who might be a pervert. I'm not sure what the story is.
There's absolutely zero chance that Arteta would ever sign him. Arteta wouldn't sign him if Ben Yedder gave us $100 million.
Yeah, we don't know that he is, but the odds are not zero. We know it's more than zero.
All joking aside, that there's extending. He's not only is he 34 and he's like pocket size, but he's also there are mitigating off the field factors that are why he does not have a club right now. We'll say that.
Yes, which has been mentioned in the chat. I don't need to read it.
Yeah.
The next guy is called Harold Preciado. I can't say that I've ever heard of him. You probably have, Kelly.
No, I have no idea who this player is. No.
So yeah, I'm gonna pass on him because I just have no idea what he's about. You may have heard of Maxi Gomez.
I have heard of Maxi Gomez.
I have as well. I think he's playing La Liga, Valencia, maybe.
Yeah. So Maxi Gomez,
Uruguayan as well, I think. So
yeah.
I mean, the fact that I've heard of him is a good sign. So, maybe he's in the running. Ake Loba, no idea.
Also
he's
no idea.
African. Lebo Mothiba, nope. Yaroslav Niez, this doesn't make for good viewing, guys. Marco Dugancic. Mariano Diaz is another interesting name. He is 30 years old. No, he's 31 years old. He has played for Real Madrid in the past. He has an 18-goal season in him when he played at Lyon. 31. Gerard Deulofeu, but he's injured, so he probably shouldn't get him. Anybody interested in a Diego Costa? I mean, these names
my age.
I mean, yeah, Diego Costa is 36. His last spell anywhere, I think, was with Wolves, and I don't think he scored a goal That might have been last year.
I feel like he got into a fight with somebody and then never played again. That's what he did on like a 6-month short-term contract last year.
Another guy that would not be a good fit for Arsenal. So the picking, in other words, the pickings are super slim at center forward position. I'd probably go Mariano Diaz, but only because of his goal scoring record, like from 8 years ago.
Yeah.
And for no other reason. He's 31, Spanish. He used to play at Real Madrid. That's good enough for me from the names that are here. Maxi Gomez would be a runner-up. But yeah, I think the bigger point about this question is that people might be screaming for a name now outside the window.
Yeah.
But when you look at the people who are actually available, I actually think that maybe no player is better than any one of these.
There's one circumstance where they probably couldn't improve us. It's like the only time that we can say that, even though that line's been toted out for like the last 9 months here.
Yes, exactly.
Jared, do you have anything to add there? Is there any magical player that we're not hearing about that exists out in the universe that we could and should sign to help supplement our attack?
You did mention Memphis Depay the other day, but I think he does play in Brazil.
Somebody said he was currently on a roster. The only other one I can think of, not a center forward, but if we were going to play Trossard or, Martinelli when he comes back down the middle, if, just for fun and the kind of, sometimes you laugh so you don't cry. So in terms of this game, I'll just throw out the former Arsenal man, Carlos Vela, I believe is available.
He hasn't been.
If Mike is watching, he's screaming and running around.
I mean, I know at least one person would vote for him, and it's our friend.
But for some frame of reference on Carlos Vela, like he hasn't been able to run for several years. I think he's the all-time leading goal scorer in MLS. He was quite a good goal scorer and a good player in MLS. He has not run an interval sprint in 5 years. Like, this is a league that had Sebastian Giovinco, who is 5'1" and weighs 85 pounds, was like among the leading scorers. I mean, nobody worthwhile is out of contract here. So again, if anybody in the chat, if you can think of any sort of free, like you're literally, here's what you're picking up from right now. The Scandinavian leagues are off season. So you're looking there. The Argentinian league is just starting out. So even those players, and like the Brazilian leagues is starting up too. MLS. So you're going through the Major League Soccer. This is literally a situation by which you would probably, versus signing any of these idiots who don't play anymore for good reason, like you are just promoting other teams, or just like, again, doing something insane, like just playing Gabriel Magalhaes up front for 20 minutes. I think that would be far better than playing Carlos Vela up front for 6 games. I think you could get a much higher return on your investment playing Gabby up there for 5 minutes a match.
Yeah, I said Vela mostly in jest. I'm not actually.
Oh yeah, no, that's a great needle for Mike Hurst, by the way.
But I mean, yeah, you could have honestly, if the window was still open, I think we missed some opportunities for squad players that could have filled in minutes. Or if you wanted to go to the MLS, there's actually some decent attacking players there. Especially if you're talking about wide players, there's tricky wingers all over the world.
Yeah.
Can have their moment, which is really all we're looking for. Somebody who can come in and have a couple solid moments, score a couple of goals, and that could be the difference in our season, what we want to accomplish. But yeah, Vela was said mostly in jest because there are no good options at this point. I think we're stuck with what we have, and we're going to see some interesting lineups.
Okay, love it. So we still have our director of football hat on after having an unpleasant conversation over coffee in London with Carlos Vela. But it's okay because fuck him, so it's fine. We made him sign a shirt for Mike Hurst when we had this conversation, then sent him home. Coach, obviously, to LA. Economy, where he had to pay for his check bag. Anyway, so
all the proceedings that we make from this podcast,
yeah, that's right. Like, it's a good time to announce our Patreon. Well,
saving it for a one-way Spirit flight for Carlos Vela.
We're talking to Barry Horowitz because he probably is it would be helpful to do some business planning with us. So. Magic's in the chat. Have you hooked up with Horowitz since you've moved to Florida and helped work on our business model for our Patreon?
Yes. Magic. And when can he join the pod?
I feel like we might have to go and mail him like a Verizon router to be able to get on the internet to do this. I don't think this is a give me that he has the technical capacity to jump on this podcast on short notice. But anyway, back into I guess reality. Now you two are the directors of football for Arsenal. We're going to live in a world where KSE says, you know what, you guys are doing great. We've been holding this powder is truly dry. It's quite dry. It's been sitting here out of the rain
It's so dry, it's blowing away.
It's so dry that if a stiff wind is going to blow it all away, we have a net 150 million for you. This is the war chest that we've been talking about for a decade and a half. It's right there. The powder's dry. The war chest is there. How are you going to spend your 150 million pounds? How do you attribute them? Who are you bringing in? It doesn't have to be exact. We can be riffing a little bit here, but what are areas of focus and who would you like to bring in? Assuming that there's probably going to be some ins and outs that can mitigate some of the gaps too. Jared,
so are we assuming, relatively anyone who would be reasonably potentially available is on our radar?
I think between us three, we have a pretty good grasp on what is reasonable. Like I would say that Alexander Isak is somebody who's not reasonable, and getting Victor Gyökeres for 45 million pounds is also not reasonable. Assume their sensible market value, roughly what has been leaked. And I would say Ollie Watkins would be somebody that you probably put in the 50 to 60 million pound range in the summer, something like that, where we're not going to, there's no Arsenal discounts. There's no anything. And I'm pretty sure my kid just fell out of bed. So I apologize.
So the first name that came to mind, which you've already said you view as unreasonable, to which I, for the most part, agree, is Alexander Isak. Mm-hmm. And this would be a big if Newcastle missed the Champions League spaces and Arsenal was interested and he had an interest in coming, that would be my sole focus. I would cater the rest of my business around whatever remaining budget I had from bringing in Alexander Isak. Mm-hmm. I think he's more important than any combination of two or three guys that would cost the same amount, simply because we have just such a glaring area of need in one position. And if you have a chance to grab arguably one of the best guys playing that position in world football right now, you have to go and take advantage of that opportunity. And there's a lot of other strikers that we're going to talk about. You mentioned Gyökeres. I'm sure we'll talk about Sesko. Mm-hmm. Those guys may end up being phenomenal, but there's no guarantee somebody's going to come to the Premier League and be a 20-goal scorer. The only evidence you have is if somebody's done it. And Alexander Isak is the guy who's done it. He's played in the Premier League. He's put up a 20-goal season. And he's still, in his prime, and it's a perfect time to buy him. He's going to cost a ton of money, obviously. But if I had 150 million and it was going to cost me 125 to bring in Isak this summer, leaving me with just that remainder to fill in any other spots, I would still do it, just because that area of need is so overwhelmingly glaring on the current Arsenal squad.
Would you apologize to me after he tears his ACL 5 seconds into the first preseason?
I can't commit to anything because everything just feels so likely right now.
Okay. Absent Isak, what would be a more fun and creative combination of players? Because I don't disagree with you, for the record. I think Declan Rice is one of the few 9-figure transfers in the history of world football that has been unanimously valued for money. He has fundamentally changed us as a team, and he is 25 years old, and he is probably one of the best box-to-box midfielders in the world, and we have that player for the next 5 years. In multiple iterations of our team, it has been well worth the money, and paying 65 million for a much worse player would have been sensible value, but it would have been really fucking stupid. And I take him over Caicedo any day, by the way.
Yeah, it seems pretty obvious at this point. Mm-hmm. But he was one of the most, I think, and this is the most important thing when you're talking about these extraordinarily high cost signings. Declan Rice was the most, what you're getting player you probably could have picked out of any signing in the world that summer. You've seen enough of them in the league. You know exactly what you're getting. Mm-hmm. And he's proven to be just that. I feel that way about Isak, in that I feel comfortable enough now. We've seen him do it in the Premier League and have seen a large enough sample size to know what you're getting. I understand why we didn't get him directly from Sociedad when that was rumored back in the day. And I think the cost was 70, 80, 90 million at that point. It was something crazy, which in hindsight would have worked out fantastic. But I understand why at the time we didn't do it. Now, I think there's enough evidence to back that move to say that he is worth it. If we're taking him off the table, Sesko, I like. He strikes the ball as well as anyone you're going to see. I mean, he hits it pure. He's really an interesting prospect, but for me, he is still just a prospect. Mm-hmm. If we sign him this summer, I'll be very, very happy, because we need a striker, and he's one who looks like he has a really high ceiling. Yeah. And the question is, you look at what are the likely outcomes or the possible outcomes for him? Is he going to be a 20-goal striker, or is he going to be Rasmus Højlund? Yeah. A big guy who strikes the ball extremely well, and then you get him out there and it just doesn't quite work. Now, I tend to lean more towards the former. I think he would be a pretty effective player, and I'd like to see him come in. But again, there's no guarantee unless you get someone who, like I said, you really, really know what you're getting. But he would probably be top of my list, and he would be ahead of Gyökeres on my list, just for the record.
Yeah.
Gyökeres, I like, and my concerns aren't necessarily about him specifically as much as kind of the explanation of him, if that makes sense, in that he's a guy who, coming into age 24, 25, had one offer, and it was Sporting, or that was the best offer he had. He's had one monster season. So guys who are coming into their prime that don't have any huge offers, who are coming off of just one great season, now it's going to be two. So I think, that's, you can kind of safeguard a little bit that maybe he's going to be as good as we think he is. But there, like I said, there's no guarantee. So it's almost just, you've got to look at the potential outcomes for players, and then somebody in the front office, which, knock wood, they make some better decisions this summer, has got to take a look at those numbers and say, let's look at the likely outcomes for this list of players and decide what's going to be the best avenue forward. But to answer the original question, for me, it's Isak all day. I don't care if we're signing guys on free and $10 million players around him to supplement the roster. I think he's the important piece of the summer.
All right, awesome. Christian, same question.
Yeah, I agree with, the Isak conversation. I think Newcastle will squeak into the Champions League spots likely, especially if it expands to 5, which it's likely to do this year. And it's reported that Newcastle and Arsenal hate each other.
Good.
And so, if they've got another buyer for Isak that's willing to pay about as much as we would, then he might go that place if Isak really wants to move on. So I think there's enough headwinds that are acting against us where it'll make that transfer difficult. I for the same reasons I like Sesko as well, but he is a project, and I think we're in a win now situation. Luckily, we've got Havertz, and assuming he comes back and can return to full fitness and can give us 15 goals and approximately 15 goals in the league, and pitching with some assists and do all the work that he does that we know is really valuable.
And I just cutting in there, I would think that part of the appeal of Sesko for Arsenal is that he has a physical profile that is very similar. And if we're talking about floors for prospects, it's very hard to see a universe where he could not also do the press triggering and attacking the ball in the air and the hold up stuff. Assuming that you have a good gauge of his commitment and energy levels and everything, he does not seem like a guy who's just going to fanny about the 6-yard box waiting for tap-ins. Like, you can protect your floor by having somebody who will just do all the stuff that we love about Kai Havertz, but could also kick the ball in a way that doesn't seem like he's wearing 2 shoes on the wrong feet, which Havertz sometimes does. Anyway, jump in.
Just to be different, I think if you're looking at the Bundesliga, which I think the Bundesliga is an interesting place to look for attacking talent, because as we know, it's a highly transitional league. And I think despite the fact the Premier League is less transitional, I think it's becoming more transitional. And so you look at guys who are really good in transition from defense to offense in the Bundesliga, and I think you can begin to, with more certainty, begin to project out how they might do in the Premier League. So for that reason, I was listening to Phil Costas. He does a podcast where he does some scouting of interesting players around Europe. And around the time that Marmoush went to City, he did one for, I don't think I'm saying his name right, but Hugo Ekitike from Frankfurt. And what I found interesting about that conversation, I ended up watching a few comms. So I'm not an expert on this guy, but just listening to him and his guest talk about this guy's profile, and also just watching him, that he's sort of the next version of Isak, if you will, and you're paying for, a very raw form of that, but a guy who has that kind of skill set, who's 22, and is scoring at a phenomenally high rate in the Bundesliga. He's got 12 goals and 3 assists this year and 20 appearances in the Bundesliga. From the comp I watched, he is very dribbly, just like Isak. He's rapid. He's quite strong for his slight frame. I would be worried a little bit about his frame moving to the Premier League just because of how much more physical it is. But if he can put on some muscle and a bit more heft to him, I think he could weather a lot of the physicality of the Premier League. He might be a guy that I'd be interested in looking at if the price was right. If you're willing to invest in a project and you're willing to wait 18 months to 2 years to see that come into fruition at its height, that would be another guy I'd be interested in. And then looking at perhaps a winger, because I think we're going to need another winger. is Antoine Semenyo from Bournemouth. I've liked him since he kind of jumped off the screen this year at Bournemouth. 7 goals, 3 assists. He's another guy that dribbles with power. I think in general our team lacks high quality dribbling. And space eating and getting around players in tight spaces, which we face a lot of low blocks in this league. And so a guy like Antoine Semenyo, I think, could be really handy for the kinds of defenses that we play against. So that would be another interesting guy, again, for the right price, 50 million.
Super high floor player. I think he's one of those guys you bring in, and he's I think he has more goal output potential, but is very Trossard to me, where it's like a very, very known quantity, is doing it in a team that I think is not an elite team, but has some good players. And so you're not changing. It's not like you're buying somebody from Everton or something where you're fundamentally changing styles. Like I would have some concerns for an off the record attack, like Liam Delap, right? Where it's basically like they're out talented every game and he can just do whatever he wants. He's a free range to just run around like a crazy person and just do whatever he wants. He doesn't play in any sort of a structure because who the fuck else is scoring goals for Ipswich besides Liam Delap?
Yeah.
I totally agree with you that Semenyo is he's maybe could be our Jota, right? Where somebody who comes in and is going to be a known quantity and get goals and always be willing to make an impact and really, really, really have a high floor. Yep. And always give you something that's basically top of the Premier League level output and work rate and quality that can be used in a lot of different game situations without being somebody who's so big that is going to require your constant attention and nurturing. You can kind of drop him in there and he's a plug and play guy who very clearly has top 4 talent who's playing mid-table right now.
One more name I'll throw out there, but it's a known quantity. Don't know if it's realistic, is Rafael Leao. I love that player, again, for all the reasons I just said about Antoine Semenyo, but that much more. He is a phenomenal player on the ball.
Yeah.
The ball at his feet, dribbling, all that kind of profile we just lack in this squad. And I think he would be phenomenal. I think getting him out of Milan would be really tough. Probably would be over 100 million for sure, but that would be a name I'd also be interested in looking at.
Just because somebody put it in the chat, let me ask you two guys a name that was floated. It says Merson mentioned Harry Kane. Give me your thoughts.
So my opinion is that Harry Kane's ankles are held together with hopes and dreams, and I think that we have some serious concerns. I don't think it makes any sense. As funny as that would be, I'm not gonna I don't think we should spend astronomical amounts of money in transfer fee and salary for a 30-year-old guy who is just, we're doing it for the bants, I guess. Sophie mentioned earlier, I would be more interested in basically a 1 to 2 year Lewandowski situation, 100%. Dropping him in there as an elite goal scorer who can't really run anymore. Who fucking cares? It's somebody who's going to, almost irregardless of circumstance, I think Lewandowski would score 15 goals in the Premier League.
I can never see Arteta doing that, by the way, because he wants someone who will press their brains out, and I just don't see that.
I agree, but if it's I just don't see that being a thing. I don't know. It's interesting, and we've kind of forgotten. Is Zubamendi? Are we assuming that Zubamendi is coming, and that anything else we do is going to be in addition to the 70 million we spent for him, or is that a club leaking stuff? And we're doing 2 + 2 is 4 because we have quite a good relationship with Sociedad and we represent a pretty big upgrade. And he seems like a relatively fussy player who's really going to try to take his next move seriously. And doesn't seem to have any sort of very deep, loving affinity for Barcelona like some of our other targets do.
Yeah. I don't think anything's ever a done deal at this point, but it seems pretty likely by everything we're hearing. And he's an upgrade player. Yeah, we've talked a bunch on this about raising the floor, and he does that in a big way over probably Jorginho. We're going to see exit, and just because of age, Zubamendi would be a major upgrade in that area. So I'd be happy with that move, even though it is a pretty large chunk of the potential summer budget.
Yeah,
especially because it's a release clause. Yeah, got to pay it all up front.
Yeah, and so it's not. I would say too that's probably, especially if he is being really. Fussy is probably the wrong word, but he seems to be really, really watching his next move, clearly, and stage managing his next move. And if that's the case, and he's going to have an awful lot of control over where he goes, you're probably in a situation where you're negotiating. You're not paying you're not paying the fee up. I would be very, very surprised if we're talking about gentlemen's agreements. There wasn't something in there where it's like, okay, well, if I'm going to get you at least 60 million, I'm going to have some say in where I go, and you're going to not make the fee structure prohibitive so that I can't go where I want to go. And it seems that he's been overtly loyal to Sociedad as well, and he has kind of taken a back seat to some other Spanish midfielders because he's playing in upper mid-table La Liga, I would think too, and he's waited until he's 25, and kind of this seems like the time to go. And again, like, I think he's clearly a good player. He's not somebody that I watch a ton, but he strikes me as a very, very Arteta player, and one that the club, when they need a win, leaking stuff that they have stuff dialed in makes a lot of sense. I don't think that there's a ton of risk. And frankly, I don't think there's a ton of need in the other elite clubs in the Premier League for him either. I don't think that there's an obvious landing spot outside of Arsenal, especially with Gravenberch's ascension at Liverpool. It doesn't make a ton of sense to have a ball-playing six. And again, we are getting rid of our two controlling progressing sixes that are going to be out of contract this summer, and we'll be saving probably £500,000 in wages every week too. That can go directly to his the amortization of his fee plus his probably $200K per week contract that he'll have too.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of how about this? Who are some off the grid players that you think would be worth investment? So like one that I've seen is Jonathan David's out of contract. Somebody who scored a lot of goals and somebody that we're familiar with here in the Western Hemisphere with CONCACAF. He's the good Canadian striker. Do you have anybody that's kind of off the beaten? Again, Chris mentioned Hugo Ekitike.
Yeah.
Who do either of you guys have people that are maybe like your hobby horses? Like one of mine would be like Matteo Retegui from who's by far and away the top goal scorer in
Syria. Yeah.
In Syria for Atalanta. How much is that is a function of how Atalanta play, and pretty much everybody who plays striker at Atalanta scores a lot of goals, and how much of that is a player who's maybe a little bit of a late bloomer who's doing well in a better system and playing for a better team. Some background on him too is that he was playing in. Again, this is a big. I waited an hour and a half to get in my prior. So this is somebody that I followed in the Argentinian league, and was quite a big proponent of him. But he's accelerated his play, the starting striker for the Italian national team now through his dad's ancestry, despite being born in Argentina. But he's somebody who's like I would consider him like a very, very high end goal poacher. Who's somebody who's not particularly big or fast, but scores headers, left foot, right foot. Has really intelligent movement, is a great finisher, good penalty taker. We saw a little bit of him actually missing a penalty with a great David Raya double save earlier this year in the Champions League, but is somebody who is like quite clearly going to be in a top 4 to 6 club in an elite league soon. And Atalanta is a selling team, and you could probably put him on 125K a week and it'd represent a huge increase in his wages. And I think they just bought him for like 10 or 15 million. And so they'd sell him for 40 or 50 right away. My off the beaten path guy is Retegui. And he's somebody who's worth looking at with a high end output, but with a price that isn't consummate his output. So anyway, sorry. Tag back in.
One quick name I would say is, I don't know how Brighton always does this, but Aleba, their DM, young, bright, 21-year-old. If we're looking at DM and, for whatever reason, Zubimeni doesn't come, I've been really impressed by him sitting at the base of midfield. He seems to be more of a profile of destroyer plus dribbler. He's not much of a passer, but, we've got a lot of passers in the team. So he'd be another guy that you could look at that profile from deep as being a guy that can progress the ball from a dribble, through a dribble. And can sit in front of your base and just kind of shield the back, the back line, our two central defenders, and allows you to push some other guys forward a bit more. I think that could be an interesting profile as well. Who knows how cheap you can get him though, because Brighton gets top dollar for their guys, and I'd imagine they wouldn't want to let him go for anything less than 40 or 50 at this point. And he's only had half a season in the Premier League, so I don't know.
Yeah. Jared, we're going to wrap up here soon. Do you have anybody that's off the beaten path that you'd like to advocate for as the sporting director du jour here?
I really don't. The thing is, just for no other reason than the time limitations, I don't watch almost any other football other than the Premier League.
Oh,
and at that point, guys aren't really under the radar anymore. I mean, if I had more time, I would absolutely love to watch some Bundesliga, to watch some La Liga. I do catch a couple of live MLS games every year just to get out and see some live football, and that's my only option. But most of what I watch is just the Premier League on the weekends, and every player that would be, under the radar, by the time they've reached that level, I think they're no longer at that point. So there's probably some good championship options out there, but in general, I like the explanation you guys gave for the type of player that would fit that bill, and I think that's something we should definitely look for. But I couldn't tell you a name that comes to mind right off the top of my head.
No,
Kelly's got like 40 more he'd give us if we had like 2 hours. I'm sure.
Jared, you're in great company because I think you and Jason Ato have that exact same line of thought. I'm sure he had the same conversation where he sat down with Josh and he said, "All right, man, what are your creative expectations?" Like, I don't know. I mostly watch the Premier League, and pretty much everybody here is known. So what do you think, Josh?
By the way, today I read a quick article on Jason Ato and how he rose to prominence. And
I'm going to hate this story. I can already tell.
I think I shared it with you. Maybe you didn't see it in the chat, but I told Mike Hers that what I read was his career has been spent in recruitment and sort of the technical side of the game. I don't think he was ever a player, but the key thing is he's married to a Brazilian and he speaks Portuguese. Now, you might recall a couple of years ago, Edu let go a ton of the scouting department, of which Ato was one of them, but he kept him around. I'll give you one guess as to why he was kept around. I don't think it's because he's all that good at what he did. I think it's because he had a Brazilian wife and he speaks Portuguese.
Yeah.
And that made them quick friends. Maybe he can prove me wrong. Maybe he's going to be a phenomenal director of football one day, but I read that and I was like, I see what's going on here.
I hope that my boss, when I'm doing absolutely nothing, will leak very promising stories about how happy he is with my performance. So that's we can all aspire.
Your boss is your wife, Kelly, so we all know this. So
yeah, she's not going to say anything positive in public. Let's be real. All right, guys. Well, Jared, first and foremost, we appreciate you coming on and bailing us out. People hear Christian and I an awful lot, and your perspective and very, very high quality microphone and studio. There's a huge upgrade to Chris's basement and my
basement and my no mic. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you did sound nice and clear today, though. So if you could, can you tell people where they can find you on the social medias if they want to talk about Premier League and other things?
Yeah, mostly Premier League. Yeah, it's down below. It's at JC_AFC. And yeah, it's great to get back with you guys. I know we talk quite a bit via text in the group chat, but it's great to get a chance to come on and join your crew for a night.
Perfect. All right, and to my left, like again, the rum's starting to hit now. So Christian, will you just tell them where you're at and what you do, what your things are?
West Suburban AFC. If you like banner, if you like lots of banner, that's what I'm really publicly known for on Twitter. I'm a bit more measured. These guys can keep me honest in a kind of a group chat setting and on this podcast, although I do a little bit of banner on this podcast as well. But yeah, I'm around. I try to be a steady member of the show. We're trying to get more regular, but it's lots of competing stuff going on with family and work and all that kind of stuff. So we get on when we can, but it's nice to have friendlies like Jared to come on and add a different energy and just pinch hit when we need somebody else to come on. So it was fun, guys. I really enjoyed this, and I think it was a good balm for all the stuff that's been ailing us as Arsenal fans with all the bad news that's come down the pike in an off week where there was not any games to be watched. So thanks.
Yeah. All right. So I am South Metro AFC. I'm not the regular host. That normally goes to the charming Mike Hers. He's out because he's chasing one of his many children around the neighborhood or drinking Modelo's or doing one of the other things that he likes. Working from, speaking of people who I don't know what he does professionally, I'm pretty sure Mike just works in 90 hours a week doing things to be determined later. But hey, our fearless leader will likely be back next time. I'm South Metro AFC. You can find me on the Twitters. I mostly complain about the transfer window. I post a lot of Simpsons and Mad Men memes, which are very niche, but usually almost 1,000 people, only half of which are porn bots, seem to be really into what I say. So if you don't follow me already, go ahead and join. Christian, just a heads up, I have no idea how to end this podcast, so
I'm going to end it.
Stuff. Again, I have been South Metro AFC. Thanks to Jared. Thanks to Christian at JC_AFC at West Suburban AFC. Thank you, chat. Thank you, all of our people. Not thank you, the weirdo Lee Gunner bots that came in there. Fuck them. But go join your master on a beach running from the cops and fucking wherever you are. Good night.
Right foot this time, Martin Odegaard.
Zinchenko from Ketia, it's in, it's 4. Martinelli tiptoeing in. Predatory, perfect. There is a gorgeous arrogance about Arsenal now.
It really is. They are enjoying every second of this.